Hello everybody, I do believe I'm live. You can see behind me some fantastic new fabric that Rue has discovered in her trawling of the op shops, the charity shops all around Perth. I have a t-shirt actually like this, which is one of my favourites and makes people want to lie me down on the floor and drive a car over me apparently. But anyway, this is lovely stuff, very happy, and today I am reading from Can I Kiss Her Yet? Which has arguably the worst cover of any of the books that we did, because my Photoshop skills were terrible at the time that I did all the covers, and I was doing them sort of sequentially, obviously, so I did that bear first and then worked through as I released each book. And when I came to this one, I had absolutely no idea, because the other ones sort of feature some animals or some very specific incidents, and this one I was like, well, it's about the wedding. All I could think of that would really symbolise a wedding was a cake, so we got a stock photo of a cake from the internet, and the rest and literally just took pictures of a plastic toy camel and a little hamster, because one of the stories I might read today actually about hamsters, there's a story about hamsters, and then the most appropriate wedding toppers we could get, which was a fairy and a kind of a knight, I guess, a king. It's weird, and they're so badly done. I actually feel quite bad about anybody who's actually forked out good, honest money for a paperback of this book. So it still looks beautiful, and I was amazed when it first arrived. I was like, it looks like a real book, you know, given that I did everything myself, all the pictures and all the laying it out and all the text and everything. It's gorgeous, but in hindsight, whoa, that's ugly.
The things you learn.
Yes.
But you know, it's all good.
Anyway, so we'll get straight into it. I might as well crack on. No point listening to me waffle about absolute nonsense for ages. So here we go. This book, it's not as popular as some of the other ones, I guess, because there isn't as much of a travel sort of thing component to it, and I guess an awful lot of people got into my books because they liked the travel aspect of it, and then stayed for the stupidity. So this one is just all stupidity and very little actual travel. So I have dug out some travel for you. So I'll read a little bit about Jordan, but I'll set us up first with the beginning, and then we'll crack on from there. So on the dawn indeed. Here we go. Actually, not the exact beginning, because one of the slight pitfalls of writing books like this is, whilst they're in a series, people can randomly just buy one because they're intrigued by Asia or by Australia or whatever. So I have to start each book with a little sort of a bit of a recap in case somebody's bought it and they've never actually read any of my other stuff before. So instead of jumping straight into the adventure, there's a bit of a recappy bit. So we'll gloss over that. Mostly talk about me being an idiot, which we all know is true. Anyway, so so just to set the stage, I'm now back in England, having flown there to help look after my granddad, who's okay and now living in a little house of his own just down from my parents at this juncture. And Rue has stayed in Australia and waited until the flights were more reasonably priced, and she is now flying in to join me. Here we go. This is a chapter called Incoming. As the day of Rue's arrival in England dawned cold and clear, I was watching it, the dawn I mean, from the back seat of my parents' car. They generously offered to drive 140 miles from Somerset to Heathrow Airport so the whole family could welcome my bride-to-be into our glorious country. I'd originally intended on making quite a scene, but time and budgetary constraints had reduced my efforts to a giant cardboard sign and a big box of chocolates. "You're taking your phone?" Dad had asked me on the way out. "Dad, the only 3 people on the planet who know that number are going to be in the airport." "Oh, fair enough," he said. I spent the journey in a state of nervous excitement. I hadn't seen Rue in almost a month. That was the longest we'd been apart since we first met, and though we'd been keeping in touch on Skype, I still had those butterflies in my stomach when I thought about seeing her again. The last time I'd seen her, I'd proposed to her. I'd stood on what turned out to be a storm drain cover and offered her the cheap ring I'd bought on eBay, and by some undreamt of miracle she'd said yes. I really, really hoped she hadn't changed her mind. The airport was crowded, which didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was that as the crowd thickened, and then diminished, and then swelled again, ready for the next batch of arrivals, Rue was nowhere to be seen. Her flight had been on the ground for an hour, but that was understandable. Then it had been on the ground for 2 hours and there was still no sign of her. Towards the end of the third hour, still waiting fruitlessly with my box of chocolates, I was starting to panic. Okay, so I'd been panicking since 10 minutes before she was due, but this was something else. This was real. Something was wrong. And it's definitely Heathrow she was coming into, Dad asked, for the 30th time. I just stared at him, admiring his composure, because I was freaking out. And then my phone rang. I jumped about 3 feet into the air, not only because I was not expecting it, I honestly thought I'd left the damn thing at home. I was kind of glad of it now, though, even if it was bright pink and rather dainty. I fished it out and flipped it open, my hands trembling so much I nearly dropped it. "Roo?" I asked, a mix of hope and desperation in my voice. But it was a stern male voice that answered. "Is that Mr. Slater?" Yes it is." "This is UK Border Security, Mr. Slater. I have a Krista Raynon here who claims she's your fiancée." Yes, she is my fiancée. Is she okay?" "That's what we're trying to decide, Mr. Slater. You do realise that she's not allowed to get married on a tourist visa?" No, I didn't realise that." "And that she's not allowed to enter the UK for the purpose of getting married while she's holding a tourist visa?" And that she doesn't have enough money to support herself as a tourist in the UK?" No, that's okay. I'm going to support her." "Uh-huh. And what is your profession?" "Well, And this is when my heart remembered to beat and started making up for lost time. Suddenly, everything was very wrong. I had a bad feeling about this. The words died on my tongue. I still proudly proclaimed that I was an actor to anyone who cared to listen, but the truth was, I'd had more days of work cleaning public toilets recently than I had acting. If there was ever a time to lie about that, it was now. But there's one question which always follows the statement, "I'm an actor." It's a question that all wannabe actors dread. It's, what have you been in? And in my case, as in so many others, the answer would be nothing. I had to think very carefully here. I was playing a dangerous game and suddenly the stakes were astronomically high. If I couldn't convince this man that I could viably support her, Rue could be refused entry to England, which meant they'd be putting her on the first plane back to Australia and sending her the bill. It would be even tougher to get married if we were £1,000 poorer and 10,000 miles apart. Think carefully, Tony. Choose your next words as though your life depended on them. I'm a writer." There, that should do it. "A writer? Really? Who do you write for?" "Myself." "Uh-huh. And what do you write?" "Travel books." "And do you have any books published?" No, not yet." "So what do you do for a living?" I was at a loss. Should I start trying to explain medical research to him? How I was testing experimental medicines on my body to fund my exploits? Probably not a good idea. Quick. Least suspicious lie. Astronaut. Explorer. Pro snowboarder? I cast my mind back to the last job I'd actually been paid for doing in this country. It was quite some time ago. "I'm doing temp work for an agency," I told him. "Mostly data entry." Was it my imagination? Or could I sense a hint of triumph in his "Do you have any savings?" Not really." "What I'm trying to establish, Mr. Slater, is how you are going to afford to support your fiancée if we decide to let her into the country. And I have to be honest with you, it's not looking good." But, we're going to live with my parents. They'll help to support us. They're here now if you want to speak to them." I felt like a terrible coward for trying to draw them into it, but I was running out of cards to play. In fact, I had precisely two. Dad, whose mild-mannered exterior houses a logic so infallible he could convince an Eskimo that snow falls upwards, and Mum, who, despite being only 5 feet tall, was quite capable of bursting into this guy's office and choking the bastard into submission with her bare hands. I think she acquired that trait whilst raising me. But the voice was back. "No need to involve your parents, Mr. Slater. This is about your fiancée and you. I need proof that she can afford to stay in this country without trying to work, or I won't be able to let her in." Irrationally, I laughed at him. The idea was just so preposterous that I only narrowly avoided telling him so. An Australian coming to the UK to work in the middle of the worst recession in living memory, when their economy is booming, their minimum wage is more than triple what ours is, and they have to walk around with a sign saying, "I already have a job," to stop people accosting them in the streets and offering them one. The voice, however, did not appreciate the absurdity of his comment. "I'm not joking with you, Mr. Slater. This is not a laughing matter." Shit! This wasn't going well. No, sir. Of course not, I told him. I applied heavy emphasis to the sir to make sure he knew that he was the boss. Small people on power trips tend to like this, and I was already picturing this man as a pedantic, rules-obsessed Jobsworth. Making friends wasn't going to get me out of this one. Only money, of which I had almost none. If only we hadn't spent Rue's... Inheritance! I blurted. Sorry, what was that? Rue, Krista, has an inheritance. Her mother passed on last year and she has a sizable inheritance in the bank. Really? He sounded sceptical. How much? I'm not sure, but it's substantial. Tens of thousands of dollars, I believe. Right. And he hung up without another word. I glanced around in panic and shook the phone to see if any more sound would come out of it. There was nothing. No clue as to what would happen next. What have I done? 5 anxious minutes later, the doors to the arrivals terminal swished open once more, and Rue slipped through them. Her tiny frame was bowed under an enormous blue backpack, which nearly caught in the doors as she stopped to scan the empty hall before her. Her long, wavy hair had been dyed purple, I noticed, something that probably hadn't helped at immigration. She looked scared, exhausted, and close to tears. Her smile when she saw me was like the sun peeking out from behind the clouds. I grinned back and self-consciously let the "Welcome to England" sign dangle illegibly behind me. Oh, my love, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I asked. Rue shed her backpack and collapsed into my arms. She was still shaking from fear or fatigue, probably both. I thought they were going to send me home, she cried, shaking more dramatically now as sobs she'd been stifling broke free. The man left me on my own in his little room and he didn't come back for hours. I think he went on his lunch break and forgot about me. It's okay, though. You're safe now, I told her. I didn't think they'd let me see you. I hugged her tight while she calmed down and my parents stood either side of us, shuffling awkwardly from foot to foot. When I finally released her, they both gave her a hug. So great to see you again, Mum told her. Welcome to England, muttered Dad, sounding unconvinced. It was not quite the greeting I had planned. I was really glad I hadn't hired that marching band. The gift that keeps on giving. A few days later, Rue had her 25th birthday. I know, I'm a lucky, lucky man. So what if I went to university when she was 12? They say that girls mature faster than boys anyway. And I've always been exceptionally immature, even for a boy. I'm counting that as a good thing, you'll notice. Rue was used to celebrating birthdays with her twin sister Sonia, and several times during our travels she'd made the pilgrimage back to Perth for it. This time was different. She'd chosen to spend her birthday in England with me, because having it in Australia would have meant we'd be apart for 2 full months. Neither of us could handle that. But it did make me hyper-aware of how important this day was for her. She'd be far from her friends, surrounded by my family instead of her own, so I had to pull out all the stops to make sure she was happy. I wanted to give her something really special, something she would remember. The trouble was, anything I spent on gifts now would have to come directly out of our wedding budget. I already knew we were stretched kind of thin on that front. I knew there'd be something out there for her, something affordable yet perfect, so I trusted to fate, as I so often do, and fate was in a rewarding mood. The idea came to me as I lay in bed, curled around her like a cat with a kitten, and it was all I could do to keep from yelling out in triumph. I'd done it. I'd found something that would make her happy, absurdly so, I was sure, and it wouldn't require a bank loan or a trip to the jeweller's. I realised then that I'd never have to worry about this sort of thing again. Rue had always been delightfully low maintenance, and she valued experience over expensive possessions, which is probably for the best, or she'd never have been interested in me. Buying her Prezi was simplicity itself. Back when I was trying to propose to her and frantically searching for a ring, with remarkably similar criteria, priceless and unforgettable and cheap, I'd sneakily opened a second eBay account. And they say romance is dead. Now though, this proved the perfect avenue for me to acquire a largish box without her noticing. I wrapped it at midnight, not because of any mystical significance, but because Rue likes to go to bed early, and this is literally the only waking time we don't spend together. On the morning of her birthday, I think I was more excited than she was. I took her breakfast in bed, and then led her downstairs in search of her present. She saw the size of the box and got excited. Oh, what is it? She hadn't known what to expect, but there was no chance she'd guess what was inside. She tore at the paper, pausing to roll her eyes at the ineptitude of my wrapping technique. I'd wrapped a perfectly square cardboard box. How in God's name did it end up looking like a coat hanger? Must be a thumbs thing. And then Rue was through the wrapping and was confused for a few seconds by what she was looking at. Then she shrieked, almost ripping the lid off the box to get inside it. She held up a small, translucent piece of plastic, a pipe, about the same size and shape as a toilet roll tube, and her bottom lip began to tremble. Oh, Tony, it's not possible, is it? It is, my love. No way. Yes way. You mean I can get, yup, a hamster? And she hugged me and burst into tears. Before I get inundated with complaints, let me assure you that there wasn't a hamster in that box. I believe selling them on eBay is also frowned upon. What I bought and what Rue had discovered was a modular plastic cage system known as Rotostack. This one was designed to resemble a space station, which, as we all know, is a common natural environment for rodents. Since she'd first discovered they existed, Rue loved hamsters. She loved all animals, especially small, cute ones, but growing up in Australia had denied her the chance to own any. All their native animals are protected and thus illegal to keep as pets, and foreign animals, like rabbits, pose a serious threat to their ecosystem. She'd had a guinea pig and spent years working in a koala sanctuary, but she'd never seen a hamster before coming to England. It had taken her less than a week to get obsessed. Her birthday surprise was completed with a trip to the pet shop. Rue picked a honey-coloured Syrian hamster which she named Violet Crumble, after the Australian version of a crunchy bar. When she put her hand into the tank, Violet came straight over and climbed into it, which we took as a good sign. I can feel a little hairy toes on my hand, Rue exclaimed, sounding for all the world like a 10-year-old girl. The manager of the pet shop was bemused. She's never been that excited to feel my hairy toes, I quipped. I'm not sure if that made us seem less weird or more. Rue was determined to raise a free-range hamster. I pointed out that although we'd be able to charge more for her meat, there really wasn't that much to start with. Rue ignored me, of course. Her idea was to give Violet the run of the house, at least under supervision, so she set about making the whole place hamster-proof. This is easier said than done. Hamsters, it turns out, are master climbers. Violet quickly learned the art of stairs. She'd take a run up and fling herself at the riser, embedding her tiny claws in the carpet. Then she'd do a pull-up, hauling herself over the edge and onto the next step. Then she attacked the next one. Before the day was over, she'd figured out how to get up and down the entire staircase, which presented problems of its own, of course. Rodent-proofing the ground floor of our house had been difficult enough. It's possible we're the only family in the country who had to install a hamster stairgate. Initially, Violet slept in a space station on the desk opposite our bed. She didn't stay there, though. The main advantage of the Rotostack system is also its curse. It is infinitely adaptable and infinitely expandable. Within a week, Rue had bought 2 more sets, tripling the size of Violet's accommodation. Soon after that, she began trawling eBay looking for deals, buying spare connectors and housing pods and feeding stations. And then she found a woman selling a job lot of second-hand Rotostack who lived nearby. No one else had bid, as it was a collection-only auction and my parents' house is quite remote. Rue bid and won, and we arranged to meet the lady in a lay-by just off the motorway. We'd been driving Gramps' tiny blue Nissan Micra recently, what with him not being able to use it anymore. Well, I say we were driving, but in fact Rue was driving it. I still didn't have a licence. Our contact arrived in a Range Rover, and after exchanging pleasantries, she jerked her thumb at the Micra. That your car? It is, Rue said proudly. Right. Only I don't think you're going to get it all in. She opened the back of her car, and the whole thing was stuffed with brightly coloured pipes. She had 50 times the Rotostack that we had. She was nearly right. We only managed to get it all into the Micra by burying me in it. That evening, Violet's cage grew somewhat. It took Rue an entire weekend to clean all the plastic pieces she'd bought, and as she laid out the last batch to dry on the bathroom floor, she came to a conclusion. There's too much here for Violet Crumble, she admitted. I have to say, I was happy to hear that. So, she continued, what I think we need is another hamster. That should fill most of the other pieces. It wasn't exactly the same conclusion that I'd imagined. A few days later, we were back at the pet shop. Rue had been doing some research and wanted a dwarf hamster for a bit of variety. In the tank were a mob of the little critters, tussling and rolling over each other, and one tiny, runty little albino hamster sat alone in the corner. That one, Rue said immediately. I sighed. You know, dwarf hamsters are quite social creatures, the manager said. You might be better off with a pair of them, so they've got some company. I gave the guy my best, you bastard, glance. 2 more hamsters! Rue was quivering with excitement. I sighed again. Tony, we could breed them! We didn't breed them, thank God. We did build a series of cages, a complex, rather, that dominated half our bedroom. It spiralled up from the floor and spilled onto 2 different tables. I drew the line at giving over bed space, so this prompted a radical redesign that required cardboard boxes, gaffer tape, and yet more rotor-stack parts sourced from eBay. She was buying and selling the stuff like a crack dealer, even turning a profit here and there. But her greatest enjoyment still came from the free-range play sessions. Violet's greatest enjoyment also came from these sessions, specifically one where she darted off Rue's knee and wormed her way down the side of an armrest and became lost inside the sofa. After a few hours of waiting for her to come out, followed by a strenuous hour of playing Tilt the Sofa, we had no choice but to cut the back off the damn thing. Violet was sitting in there quite contentedly, delighted with the adventure she'd had. My parents were somewhat less pleased when they came home, but as I told them, pet owners do have to put up with a little damage from time to time. They understood, having been long-term dog and cat owners in the past, but I think they were slightly alarmed by the scale of the damage in proportion to the size of the hamster. It could have been much worse, I said. I don't think this reassured them very much. Although Rue loved Violet Crumble most of all, my personal favourite was the larger of the two dwarf hamsters. In contrast to the tiny, timid albino we'd called Licky, his brother Hedgehog was so fat he was completely spherical. He was grey with a dark stripe running down his back and big bulging eyes. Licky was manic, obviously schizophrenic, probably a genius, whereas Hedgehog was big, dumb and furry. Kind of like me. Maybe that's why we got on so well. At least, I thought we were getting on well. That's why I offered to hold him when we took him to the vet to have his claws clipped. They'd grown long and curved, possibly because he just sat around all day while the others were scurrying around their domains. I bravely took the hamster into my hand, resisting the urge to coo and speaking baby language to him, as the vet was actually quite pretty, and I never did that sort of thing anyway. Hedgehog wasn't the least bit bothered, until the vet started him with the nail clippers. Then he became a very small, very cute ball of psychotic fury. His little claws, bless him, were too small to do much damage, but the teeth on a hamster are actually quite substantial. Well, I know that now. Hedgehog bit right through my finger and refused to let go for the entire operation. By the time his nails were clipped, I'd leaked a puddle of blood all over the table, the floor, and my shoes. The vet was very understanding, between giggles. That night, Rue was kind enough to report on my situation via the medium of Facebook. She let the whole world know that I'd been in an accident and that I'd been seriously wounded and that I was recovering, mostly. But you were so good holding him, even though you were bleeding all over the place. You didn't hurt him at all. You're so compassionate. That's why I love you, and that's why I'm going to marry you. Ah, well, thanks for that, love. And because you're the only person I know who can be convincingly mauled by a dwarf hamster. Now just skip forward a little bit. We'll do some travel stuff. So we happen to have the opportunity with, I think my dad's bonus from work, paid for it.
Yes, I believe.
A holiday to Jordan, just Rue and my mum and me, because me and mum had always wanted to go to Jordan, and Rue fancied it as well, so why not?
Yeah, man. We had a request for some pictures of the rotor stack as well, actually.
Oh, right.
I don't know if I'll be able to see this.
Have you got one?
I've got a picture. Not sure if it can be shown.
Oh, that was only the start, though.
This
That
is
was
level 2 out of 5.
level 2 of 5, when it went from the floor up to, that was a piano stool, and then
Yeah.
it went up to a sideboard, and it had a...
It was very impressive.
It was,
And this was level 1. That was when we first started off with 1.
that was just what I bought at birthday.
Yeah, and
Present.
it expanded
Dramatically.
substantially.
I think by the end of it, there was probably something in the order of $1,000 or £1,000 worth of rotor stack
Oh, yes.
in there at least, because it's actually pretty pricey. And Rue made a good business of selling it after we drew the line at any more hamsters. 3 was enough. I mean, our bedroom is a shoebox, and that literally, by the time we finished, fully half of it was rotor stack. The hamsters had considerably more room than we had. Anyway, funny actually, we took so many videos because they were adorable, and they did really funny, crazy things. We took so many videos and photos and all that sort of stuff of hamsters. I actually collected them all together and was going to put a whole page on my website just of photos of hamsters, and I never got around to it because, like, hello, who gives a shit about hamsters, really? So I didn't do it, but I've got an item about 457 on my to-do list. It's still make the hamster page on the website because it's there ready to go. I just never got around to it. We'll see. Yeah, maybe that'll happen in a decade or so. Anyway, onwards. I'll do a little bit more. I'll just read as far as we've got time for into Jordan, because there were some funny things on that holiday.
Oh yeah.
So here we go. Destination Jordan. We were going to be late. I knew this as I lay in bed, unable to sleep. Even though the alarm had yet to go off, even though it was long before dawn and frigid darkness held sway outside the bedroom window, I knew we were going to be late because there is a long-established law about being late in my family. It goes like this: Slaters are always late. I've been a Slater my entire life, and I've never known it to be wrong. If there was ever a morning to make an exception, though, it was this one. We had a bus to catch, followed by a rather expensive flight to Jordan, and airlines are notoriously unforgiving when it comes to matters of tardiness. An hour later, everyone in the house was up, showered, breakfasted, and ready to go. I'd been through all the usual stages, packing my luggage into the car, sitting waiting for everyone else, suddenly realising I'd forgotten something, rushing back into the house and spending 10 minutes tearing the place apart, trying to find it, while everyone else waited impatiently in the car, then discovering some other bugger had already packed it without telling me. Unbelievably, we were still on time. The boot won't shut, Dad stage whispered. The car was parked directly below our neighbour's bedroom window, so all our cursing had to be done at 20 decibels or less. What do you mean it won't shut? Hissed Mum. I mean it won't shut. Why won't it shut? Mum demanded. I don't know. I think it's broken. What? How long has it been broken? About 10 seconds. This literally just happened right now. I can't believe this. We piled out of the car and stood around offering useless advice in hushed tones as Dad tried over and over again to get the boot's latch to catch. 10 minutes later, he was debating the use of string. Shit, Mum hissed. We're late. Right, get everything into the other car. It was a fraught and foggy drive to Bristol bus station, but we made our bus by the skin of our teeth. We always do somehow. Either we have the best luck in this regard, or the worst. It would be nice one day to see what it's like not being the last aboard. Australians often tell me how lucky I am to live in a country where cheap flights to dozens of exciting destinations are so readily available. They never understand why England doesn't completely empty into Prague or Budapest every weekend. What they don't appreciate is that to take advantage of these cheap flights, one must generally get to London, and that getting to London from almost anywhere else in the country is either dramatically more expensive or considerably less pleasant than the flights in question. Usually both. The 3-hour bus journey felt like 5, mostly because it was 5. Predictably, our coach broke down en route, and we sat in the rain in the motorway service station awaiting a replacement. We were quite late when we got to the airport. Luckily, the gods that hold sway over this mysterious law kept to the rules. The plane was also late, and after we boarded it, we sat on the runway for another 2 hours just to be on the safe side. I'd never been in a plane jam before. It's almost exactly as frustrating as being in the run-of-the-mill traffic jam, only instead of listening to your family bicker about it, you get to listen to 300-odd strangers bickering. Other than that, it was quite a nice flight. We were met at Istanbul airport by a frantic bald man in epaulets who had our onward flight number scrawled onto a scrap of cardboard. Quick! Very late! He informed us as the group around him grew. He was wearing a jaunty captain's hat that had to go with his smart blue suit, but he seemed anything but confident. Come, follow! He commanded. He then escorted us at a dead run to our connecting flight. Older and less fit passengers fell away wheezing in droves, and by the time we reached the boarding gate for Amman, there was only 3 of us left. We'd sprinted the length of the airport, leaving in our wake a sea of open mouths and confused expressions. Who are those guys? People were asking, and why were they chasing that pilot? Mum was gasping for air, but still with us, a fact she later put down to wearing training shoes. The businessmen in their shiny loafers and the fashionable tourists in their heels had struggled to keep up. The returning locals, aerodynamically challenged in their full traditional bedspreads, hadn't stood a chance. Panting and sweating, we barreled through the gate and boarded the aircraft, and then sat there for the next hour and a half while the ground crew transferred our luggage. The Turkish Airlines plane was definitely older than I was. The food was great, but the entertainment left something to be desired. There was a single overhead TV at the end of each aisle, on which mustachioed men held hands and slapped each other's faces to the wail of a badly tuned clarinet and raucous canned laughter. It was probably the least strange show I ever saw on Arabic TV. No one was waiting for us at the airport. Perhaps because we were the very last to arrive, having queued all the way to passport desk, and before being told that visas were issued at a different desk, helpfully marked visas. We stood alone with our luggage, glancing around forlornly in search of our driver. Amman Airport at 10 p.m. was as silent as a grave. Well, until the taxi tout spotted us. Then the floodgates opened, and I was forced to keep them at bay with our baggage trolley while Mum placed a confusing call to the hotel. They were fairly sure, they said, that we'd already been picked up. Were we not sure this was not the case? Yes, said Mum. I am reasonably sure that we are not already inside a car on our way to your hotel. She said it without a trace of sarcasm, because honestly I don't think it had occurred to her that it was a strange question. So sorry, the man on the other end said. It was my brother. Presumably, his pickup record was less than exemplary. It turned out that someone else had seen the sign our transfer driver was holding and pretended to be me in order to avoid fighting the crowd of touts for a ride of his own. But the hotel receptionist offered to negotiate on our behalf with an airport taxi driver, and Mum, Rue and I were soon on our way. As we sped through the night, I came to the conclusion that Jordan by night is rather dark. Streetlights are obviously not in vogue, though by the time we reached downtown Amman, the headlights from the queuing traffic allowed us a glimpse into the shadowy world of market stalls and pavement vendors. Cars were bumpers to bumper on all sides of us, yet still managing to travel at decent, some would say panic-inducing speeds. Coupled with this, every driver in earshot was leaning incessantly on his horn, creating a constant cacophony. It was impossible to tell who was beeping at who for what. The hotel, by contrast, was very welcoming. I'm a budget backpacking type traveller, so I typically have low expectations when it comes to standards of accommodation. That said, I've renovated a fair few houses in my time, so I know how simple it is to turn a hovel into a haven with a mop and a fresh coat of paint. All too often, the managers of lower-end establishments don't seem to care about their upkeep, as though being cheap makes a place clean and welcoming, as though being cheap makes keeping the place clean and welcoming a waste of effort. Not so at the Burj Al Arab, or Arab Tower. We were arriving at the very start of high season. Hopefully good timing, as we were anticipating less crowds, milder temperatures and good deals to be had. Our room in the tower was a great success in this regard. Having booked a 3-bedroom for 3 of us, we'd been rewarded with what appeared to be a suite. We had a living room with a sofa and chairs, a bathroom, 1 bedroom with 2 single beds, and a separate ensuite master bedroom with the biggest double bed I've ever seen. Seriously, there was room for 6 close friends in there. It was clean and gradually getting warm, and it was costing us about £10 per person per night, including a buffet breakfast. Quite simply, I loved it. The walls of the entire suite seemed to be stencilled with a leaf design in pale gold, a massive expanse of it and flawlessly done. And as if to remind us that we were in the Middle East, every room featured a wall plaque that indicated the direction of Mecca. Mum's post-arrival investigation of our accommodation was thorough, and she quickly discovered the bidet jet built into otherwise Western-style flushing toilet. And being Mum, by discovered it, I mean... What's that? Ah! Oh, there's a... Where to turn it on? Oh, down here. Ah! The last bit was uttered as she squirted herself forcefully in the face with it. Thus ended her experimentation, proving once and for all that even age has no cure for the urge upon finding a strange button of unknown function to push it. Here are a few things I learned about my trip to Amman. 1. Provided you do your research and read as many reviews as possible, budget travel really is the way forward. Keep low expectations, be pleasantly surprised, and avoid that cotton wool wrapped Western tourist experience, unless you want to be insulated from the locals, which is sometimes understandable. 2. Taxi drivers can be a mine of local knowledge, especially if they like to show off their English skills. Of course, they may tell you what they think you want to hear. Of course, it's safe here at night. And you may have to filter out subtle declarations of poverty tucked into every comment, but you can learn a lot of key points in a short time from a local point of view, and try out any dubious language phrases you've been practicing. 3. Jordanians love the king, who is wise and benevolent, and hate the government, which is greedy and corrupt, not the other way around. And 4. Don't rely on word association to remember foreign phrases, or when under the considerable stress of having to use your hardwood knowledge, there's a good chance the wrong thing will come out. For example, when attempting to remember the phrase, peace be upon you, salam alaikum, I developed a bad habit of coming out with salami alaikum, may the sausage be upon you. And 5. Before testing a bidet, it is wise to interpose an arse between it and one's face. Though later, she tried it out again, properly this time, and emerged giggling with 2 further comments. It works, and it's very, very cold. How are we for time, love?
Good, it is 36 past 2.
Okay.
You can talk slower if you want.
Talk slower. Am I going too fast?
No.
I speed up, I start slow, and then I speed up and up
You
and
get
up.
all
Before I go.
excitable.
Sorry. Amman by day. We were woken by the Muslim call to prayer, playing on loudspeakers from the tower of the nearest mosque. It was a haunting melody with a soaring, yearning quality, at once beautiful and alien and utterly different from the harsh wail I'd heard in movies. I lay there letting the sound wash over me, the cadence rising and falling, the words unknowable and deliciously exotic. In the apartment blocks around me, good Muslim people would be rising from their beds to praise Allah for the first time that day. All over the country, in houses, huts and palaces, over 90% of the Jordanian populace would be doing the same. I stayed in bed. After 10 minutes or so, the song faded. I turned over and went back to sleep. After all, it was 4:30 in the morning. We were woken by the Muslim call to prayer, playing on loudspeakers from the tower of the nearest mosque. It was a haunting melody and, well, it was remarkably similar to the first episode. Only this time, it was 6 a.m. I had several minor revelations at this point. Number one, these people prayed a lot. Number two, they would be praying at the exact same times every morning, which meant I would be awakened each time as well, so I might as well get used to it. Number three, in olden days, it would have been a man singing the call to prayer from your tower 5 times a day. How gutted would you be if the local dude was crap? The last thing I'd done before bed was post a Facebook status about how much I was enjoying my first night in Jordan. So I logged on to find a flurry of comments like, "You've let your standards slip, mate," and "How deep into Jordan did you go?" and I hope she's better in bed than she is at writing books." That's the trouble with being a comedian. All your friends tend to be comedians too. I groaned and replied that Jordan kept waking me up in the middle of the night and now I was seriously sleep deprived. "Should have mentioned how horny Jordan is," Rue added. It was true. Incessant beeping from the traffic below had been the major cause of our insomnia. By some terrible trick of acoustics, every snort, scratch, fart and whistle from the street below came in through our window, magnified 100-fold, as though the side of the building was acting as some kind of amplifier. It was like we were sharing a room with the various tramps and late-night street vendors 13 floors below us, and it taught us the real meaning of the phrase, "a city that never sleeps." As we prepared to go down for breakfast, I heard Mum calling me. Rue investigated and came back rolling her eyes. Mum had locked herself in the loo again. Possibly this was karma in action, as she'd stolen a butter knife from the plane in case we need it for picnics. This thought occurred to me at exactly the right time, and using the knife, I was able to jimmy the lock from the outside and set her free. Mum was pleased that we didn't need to involve the hotel management this time, and I was quite proud of myself. This was now the 4th continent on which I'd successfully broken into a toilet. We were the only people partaking of the hotel's buffet breakfast, which turned out to be an all-you-can-eat cold-boiled egg and 3 allegedly different kinds of flatbread which looked identical to the naked eye. After watching us engage in a staring match with the bowl of boiled eggs for 10 minutes, the receptionist rather sheepishly pulled out a toaster and some sachets of jam from behind his desk. Next I had my first taste of potent Turkish coffee, enjoying until the very last mouthful, which was when I discovered that they leave the grounds in the cup. It's little things like this that make me wish I'd done more research before a trip. For our first adventure in Jordan, we decided to investigate Amman's most popular tourist attraction, the remains of the Roman temple to Hercules, which sat atop Citadel Hill. Our super-friendly receptionist knew a back way in, which he described to us in great detail. It was the route the locals used, he explained, and would bypass all the usual tourist kitsch. The route began right behind our hotel and climbed through the neighbourhood which spilled down the sides of the hill. It was rough, steep going. We followed the only possible course, climbing up, around, past and sometimes through people's houses, through yards, over terraces and upstairs in their hundreds. We climbed through 1,000 years of history and chaos, past cinder-block hovels, tin sheds, ancient adobe houses, piles of rubble and the occasional gnarled eucalyptus tree. Lives flourished all around us. Dogs barked as we passed. Cats shot forth across the path in front of us. Washing lines stretched between the houses, and children scrambled back and forth, chasing balls, dogs and each other. Pausing often, we made our slow but fascinating progress up the hillside, delighting in the surprise views out over the city and stone steps so worn they were positively biblical. Just below the crest of the hill, we startled a family of rabbits who were mooching around on the first patch of grass we'd seen since entering the country. We followed the grassy slope upwards, emerging behind the outermost edge of the citadel and snuck into the ruined fortification in secret. Thus we bypassed the gate and the entrance fee, which has made me feel guilty ever since. It's true, crime does not pay. Mum even suggested we try and find the ticket booth, but I felt that was going a little too far, at least until I saw the guards. They were everywhere. Heavily armed police dressed more like the SAS in black combat fatigues and boots with rolled-up balaclavas on their heads. They were intimidating as hell, but they didn't seem to be doing much, just standing beyond all the safety barriers on the edges of cliffs and monuments, chatting casually to each other as if to say, "We make the rules. Nothing is forbidden to us. Just you try it." Tough gig, I remarked. Can't see there being much trouble up here. Visitors tend to be in the 60-plus bracket. Not a lot of violent crime in that demographic. I'd love to see their job description. Look menacing. Smoke cigarette. Take phone call. Move to opposite end of site and repeat. We strolled around the site, which covered the relatively flat top of Citadel Hill. From all sides, the city of Amman could be seen stretching off into the distance, thousands upon thousands of seemingly identical buildings climbing to every inch of the surrounding hills like barnacles on a ship's hull. From this height, the city was a drab, uniform brown, liberally studded with the tiny black squares of a million windows. It was an essay in population density written in dust. The ruins, on the other hand, were amazing. You had to hand it to these ancient civilizations. They liked their columns, and they liked them big. Two in particular dominated the site, somehow still supporting a carved lintel the size and weight of a bulldozer. Chunks of carved stone were piled up around the remaining walls, some pieces so intricate they seemed machine-moulded rather than hand-carved. I always find when looking at a site like this that the skill level of ancient craftsmen blows my mind. I can't even begin to calculate the cost, in modern terms, of commissioning a single block of such work. Yet these are pieces of decorative friezes that would have run for hundreds of feet around the building, or capitals that would have sat atop columns so massive that their details could never be seen from the ground. I'd love to cost up the materials and manpower to build a modern-day Temple of Hercules in the same style and same hilltop location as this one. I guess the only groups who could afford such an undertaking would be the major religious organisations. Not much had changed there then. We poked our heads into a Stone Age cave which had been discovered in the recent excavations. Most of the citadel is still unexcavated. According to the guidebook, this was proof that Amman's central hill was amongst the oldest continually populated places in the world. The cave didn't offer much proof to us though. No Stone Age net curtains or barbecued dinosaur ribs, so Rue and I left Mum trying to decide if the scuff marks on the wall constituted cave paintings. We wandered back through the ruins, still marvelling at their scale. They were crying out to be climbed. A handful of tourists and locals were strolling casually along the low walls and fallen archways, clambering onto stone pedestals for a better view or posing atop some of the smaller chunks of masonry. No one seemed to care. I couldn't resist trying a few parkour jumps across gaps in the stonework. After all, they'd survived earthquakes that destroyed the rest of the citadel. It seemed unlikely that my training shoes would do much damage. But then I spotted two other lads, both clearly local boys, doing a bit of the same. They'd scrambled up the massive stone walls right up to the base of the two giant columns. They seemed to be contemplating an epic jump down to a grass-covered mound below. Surely, I reasoned, if they were up there, it must be allowed. It would never be back home. Perhaps these lads were kindred spirits. At any rate, if they were going to attempt something, I might as well give it a go myself. Before you can say bad idea, I was leaping the blocks towards them. Suddenly, a harsh command in Arabic exploded behind me. The other two guys froze, then threw a pair of worried looks over my shoulder. I crapped myself, jogged along the wall in the direction I was facing, and jumped off to the far end to safety. Rue was waiting for me in the shadows. A quick glance back the way I'd come showed the would-be athletes surrendering themselves to a whole pack of armed guards. Neither group seemed particularly cheerful. We moved as quickly as we could in the opposite direction, putting a sizable chunk of temple between me and the soldier police. I even took my bright red jacket off in case it made me more recognisable, though the fact that I was being very obviously arm-steered by the only blonde woman we'd seen since entering the country probably didn't help. Go in the springtime, the guidebook said. There'll be no crowds. Almost as my almost partners in crime were frog-marched away by the police, Rue and I peeked out from behind a 2,000-year-old corner. See how they're carrying those machine guns? Rue gestured at the departing escort. There is a time and a place for climbing old buildings and jumping off them, she said. This is not that time. She had a point. Minutes later, shunning the more impressive ruins in favour of the rocky fringes, we came across Mum. She was also looking a bit nervous, to the point where I had to ask her if she was okay. I was half afraid she'd been accosted by an overly aggressive souvenir salesman, but I needn't have worried. I'm all right, she said, taking a calming breath. I just got shouted at by the police for climbing on the ruins. Rue looked back and forward between the pair of us and shook her head in despair. We are so going to get shot on this holiday, she muttered. There we go. Shall I leave it at that?
Yeah, it's 2:45. We have a question about
How Minty says, how did you get around the tourist visa thing and getting married in the UK in the end? I'm just checking that Tony did things properly in the end.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that we got.
We did it
Visa.
when we flew back in from Jordan, because Rue had left the country to go to Jordan, so that was it. Tourist visa over, and we applied for what did we apply for? Oh, the working holiday visa.
Yes, that's
We
right.
applied for it because I'd already had a working holiday visa in Australia for 2 years and in New Zealand, and so she applied for her working holiday visa in England while we were in Jordan, and then she was granted it. And when we flew back in, happy days. So all worked good, all above and board.
So yes, we're legal.
Yes, we're legal. I did actually mention that on the way back into Jordan. But yeah, we ain't got time for it now.
That was great. Oh my God.
Yes, yeah. The start of a chapter called Paperwork. We arrived back in the UK, legal at last. Finally, we'll be able to get married without the pesky intervention of the government. Yeah, it's an extremely weird scenario getting married. You've got to give notice that you plan on getting married, and they publish it in like these papers. It's called bands. Everyone knows you've all got married in the UK, I'm sure. And
Some of you, maybe.
yeah, and it's like this ridiculous tradition. Like anybody's gonna notice this notice in the paper, and who reads this paper anyway, whichever one it is, and then constantly reads the marriage just to make sure that nobody they know shouldn't get married gets married. You know what I mean? If the person that knows that we can't get married for whatever reason doesn't already know that we're getting married, and then go and try and stop it by how are they going to discover it in the paper? I mean, what are the odds? Has that ever happened since the medieval times, since the Dark Ages? God knows. When Anyway, I mean, it's not like now there's a national database or anything that gets blasted on the internet. No, it's
The band.
in the local newspaper. Anthony James Slater is marrying Krista, who's from Australia. If anybody reading this newspaper and this article in this newspaper has an issue with that, get in touch.
Don't know how.
Presumably by letter. It's very, very strange scenario. Anyway, right. Thank you, guys. Happy with that. I really, really appreciate you all tuning in to watch me. We'll be back next week. I'll do another little bit. I'll do a bit of actually the wedding, and I'll see how I go for finding material. If I find some stonking bits that I really want to read, I'll do more. But probably I'll do one more next week of this one, and then we'll get on to Shave My Spiders, because there's so much stuff in there, so much good stuff, and that is like literally it's more than twice the size of this book. So it'll take us ages to get through that. And after that, it's just the acting book, which is crap anyway. So, thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate you tuning in. I hope you're staying safe in this crazy world. I will see you next week. I'll probably see some of you more online while I type my Facebook and all that sort of crap. But look after yourself, and thank you.